creating value, transforming industries, even saving lives, and changing the way we do business. From small steps to solving seemingly impenetrable problems. You can. You can with AI. You can with KPMG. In the AI era, anything seems possible. Creating value, transforming industries, even saving lives, and changing the way we do business. In the AI era, innovation demands responsibility, building the stronger foundations to keep your organization safe. Take this global food and beverage company who wanted to scale AI across their operations. With KPMG, they provided their employees with holistic training, setting the groundwork for responsible adoption of AI across their business and empowering their workforce to embrace intelligent solutions with confidence. Or this multinational, who were trying to navigate diverse and evolving government regulations. By developing and deploying a flexible AI framework, they minimized risk, increased the trust of their clients, and secured their organization for the next stage of AI growth. These businesses are on the path to becoming intelligent enterprises, paving the way for a safer AI future. How prepared is your organization? You can with AI. You can with KPMG. In the AI
All right. Good morning, colleagues and friends in Ghana and Nigeria. I hope we are all doing well. Please, can you hear me? If you can hear me, give me a thumbs up. All right, great. Thank you for those reactions. So we'll be starting in the next 3 minutes. Let's just allow for 3 more minutes for our other colleagues to join. Thank you.
era, innovation demands responsibility, building the stronger foundations to keep your organization safe. Take this global food and beverage company who wanted to scale AI across their operations. With KPMG, they provided their employees with holistic training, setting the groundwork for responsible adoption of AI across their business and empowering their workforce to embrace intelligent solutions with confidence. Or this multinational, who were trying to navigate diverse and evolving government regulations. By developing and deploying a flexible AI framework, they minimized risk, increased the trust of their clients, and secured their organization for the next stage of AI growth. These businesses are on the path to becoming intelligent enterprises, paving the way for a safer AI future. How prepared is your organization? You can with AI. You can with KPMG. In the AI era, innovation demands responsibility, building the stronger foundations to keep your organization safe. Take this global food and beverage company who wanted to scale AI across their operations. With KPMG, they provided their employees with holistic training, setting the groundwork for responsible adoption of AI across their business and empowering their workforce to embrace intelligent solutions with confidence. Or this multinational, who were trying to navigate diverse and evolving government regulations. By developing and deploying a flexible AI framework, they minimized risk, increased the trust of their clients, and secured their organization for the next stage of AI growth. These businesses are on the path to becoming intelligent enterprises, paving the way for a safer AI future. How prepared is your organization? You can with AI. You can with KPMG. In the AI era, innovation demands responsibility, building the stronger foundations to keep your organization safe. Take this global food and beverage company who wanted to scale AI across their operations. With KPMG, they provided their employees with holistic training, setting the groundwork for responsible adoption of AI across their business and empowering their workforce to embrace intelligent solutions with confidence. Or this multinational, who were trying to navigate diverse and evolving government regulations. By developing and deploying a flexible AI framework, they minimized risk, increased the trust of their clients, and secured their organization for the next stage of AI growth. These businesses are on the path to becoming intelligent enterprises, paving the way for a safer AI future.
All right, good morning once again, and thank you for making time to join today's webinar. And thanks again for the patience to allow our other colleagues to join the call. We are still in our Internal Audit Month, and the goal of the Internal Audit Month is to highlight the vital role internal auditors play in strengthening governance, risk management in our organizations. And I believe we are all celebrating the Internal Audit Month in our various institutions, right? So thanks again for joining this webinar. The topic for today's webinar is enhancing audit quality and evidence, tools and practices for high-performing audit teams. This is a very, very timely and important topic because you would agree with me that in recent times, there's been very strong discussions around the use of AI, data analytics by internal auditors to improve audit coverage and speed. There's also the recognition that tools are not sufficient. Tools alone will not do the job, right? So internal auditors have to adopt better strategies and practices to support audit quality. So that's why the topic for today's webinar is quite timely and also very important, right? So without wasting much time, we have a lineup of very smart professionals that will be digesting today's topic, and they will be giving us a very good understanding on the topic. For me, I have personal expectations from today's webinar. Again, I want to understand what those practices are. What are the practices that can improve internal audit quality? And what are some of the tools and technologies that are available to internal auditors, right? So if you could kindly type in the chat box what your expectations for today's webinar is so that we can track them. And then at the end of the session, we check if we have been able to meet your objectives, right? And then also within the course of the webinar session, please feel free to contribute, feel free to ask questions, and then we'll make sure that all our speakers are aware and then they address all your questions. We would also read out your contributions and your comments. I would go on to introduce our speakers. Again, I said we have a lineup of very smart professionals, starting with Henry Okine. He's a manager with the Governance, Risk and Compliance team. Henry is a certified internal auditor and a CISA, a Certified Information Systems Auditor. So Henry has a wide range of experience around governance, internal audit, internal controls, external quality assessment. He has over 8 years of experience in the field. So with a virtual clap, let's welcome and introduce, let's welcome Henry to today's session. All right, can I see more of the claps? Let's encourage our speakers. Great, great, great. Thank you. All right, so I'll move on to the next speaker. The next speaker is Valentina. She's a manager in the Internal Audit Governance, Risk and Compliance Unit of KPMG in Nigeria. She has over 8 years of professional experience, and she has relevant experience in internal control over financial reporting, internal audit, governance. She holds an MBA with specialization in cybersecurity. She's also a certified internal auditor and a member of the Institute of Internal Auditors in Nigeria. Let's welcome Valentina with a virtual clap. All right, great. And then we'll move on to our last speaker, definitely not the least, who is Adeolu Taiwo. Adeolu is a manager in the Internal Audit Governance, Risk and Compliance Services at KPMG Nigeria. She has experience spanning internal audit governance, risk management, internal controls, and digital innovations. She's a member of the Institute of Chartered Accountants in Nigeria. She's also a certified robotic process automation developer and a certified data analyst. She's currently focused on supporting internal audit functions in various institutions. Adeolu is passionate about transforming internal audits through data-enabled assurance, technology, and continuous monitoring approaches. So with a virtual clap once again, let's welcome Adeolu to today's session. And we have more of the claps, it seems. All right, great, great, great. Okay, thank you, everyone. All right, so I wouldn't waste much time. We would dive into the topic of discussion. Again, the topic for today's webinar is enhancing audit quality and evidence, tools and practices for high-performing audit teams. So Adeolu, I'll start with you, right? Audit quality is one of the terms that we often hear internal auditors speak about, right? And I've realized that the term and the meaning of audit quality is different based on who you ask. And looking at the global internal audit standard, you realize that there's quite a major emphasis on audit quality. The term quality alone appears more than 100 times in the global internal audit standard. So I want to ask you, when we talk about quality today, what does that mean?
All right, thank you very much, Daniel, and it's a pleasure to be here. So when we talk about audit quality, in the past, auditors would deem their audit successful when they are able to produce long reports filled with exceptions. They kind of weigh the quality of their audits with how much they are able to raise exceptions. But today, when you think about audit quality, you need to think about the goals of internal audit. What was the audit set to achieve? And we know that when we talk about internal audits, we're basically talking about assurance and how internal audit is able to provide assurance on an organization's risk, and with that, help key stakeholders make decisions that will move the organization forward. So when we talk about audit quality today, we should be talking about how well internal audit is able to pool their resources and how they're able to come up with sufficient evidence, and then sufficient conclusions on the risk of the organization and how that can push the organization forward. So we talk about how well internal audit is able to represent their findings, how well they are able to link their findings to risk, how well they are also able to communicate to the key stakeholders. So we talk about key stakeholders within the organizations, the process owners, the board, because the board would end up making decisions based on what is presented to them by internal audits.
Wow, thank you very much, Adeolu. That's quite insightful. So how well internal auditors are able to link risk and communicate properly to the right stakeholders, right? So thank you for that comment, right? So I'll move on to the next panelist or the next speaker, Henry, right? you agree with me that internal audit is no longer operating in the same environment it used to in the past, right? Business is changing, right? Business processes are becoming more complex. Risk is also evolving, right? So in your opinion, how have stakeholder expectations of internal auditors, of internal audits changed in the last few years? And what does this mean for the way we work as internal auditors?
Okay, Daniel, good morning, everyone. Thank you for the question. So, as we know, stakeholders now expect internal auditors to be more proactive, strategic, and also integrate technology into their operations. And historically, we know internal audits were just looking at control, we're just a control checking function, ticking box, compliance. But today, the board, the audit committee, our regulators, the ESCO, expect more than that and expect assurance over key things, as the dealer has mentioned, some emerging risk. We look at cybersecurity, ESG, we look at operational resilience. So they expect more of that from us, where we provide some assurance over these things. And so as a result, in turn, we planning must become more dynamic and also risk responsive. We should be risk aligned, adding risk to our planning, and our fieldwork must also incorporate data analytics and also broader risk intelligence. It's always aligned to risk, and management of evidence and our files should be more structured and traceable. So any conclusion we can get, we can defend it properly, and reporting in general should be shorter, clearer, and insightful and insights driven. So we should be more insightful with our reporting. We should be more strategic with it. So stakeholders now expect us to provide more foresight and insights, more than the hindsight we used to present. So as internal auditors, we should be providing more insights into the business. When we give our recommendations, it will be more insightful. So yeah, so in turn, I expect stakeholders expect us to be more insightful, more dynamic, more risk responsive, add analytics to our field work, and our reporting should be more clearer and insightful driven, and overall including technology in our internal audit operations. Yeah, so that's looking forward. That's how we should be perceived. That's how what stakeholders expect from us as internal auditors.
Great, Henry. Thank you very much for your response, right? And it seems to me that if stakeholder expectations of internal audit has increased, it means stakeholders are beginning to appreciate the value internal auditors bring to the organization, right? So there's that correlation. If the expectation has increased, it means that there's a better appreciation of what we internal auditors, do within the organization, which is a very good sign, right? So I'll move on to Valentina. On LinkedIn, I've seen quite a number of public arguments by experts and internal auditors, internal audit commentators, right, that the traditional audit model as we know it today is no longer sufficient, right? Do you agree with this? And in what ways is the traditional audit model still useful, and how is it becoming dangerously inadequate, if you think so?
Thank you for that question, Daniel. For the traditional audit model, for one, I agree with the fact that it is no longer sufficient. However, from a usefulness perspective, the traditional audit model is still quite useful because its core principles are really foundational to the professional practice of internal auditing. And then that speaks to the disciplined planning, the structured methodology, the professional skepticism, even evidence-based testing, and sound judgment of the internal auditor. Those are still essential elements, and those elements create consistency, defensibility, and even trust in audit conclusion. However, where the model becomes inadequate is when it remains too periodic, too manual, and even too retrospective for today evolving business environment. As we all know, many organizations now operate in real time. Risks are evolving, transactions happen instantly, and even decision making are increasingly becoming automated, right? In such an environment, audit approach that relies heavily on manual testing, delayed testing as well, maybe quarterly reviews, and even delayed not being proactive to the changing risk of a business, right? Issues or may remain not addressed in time or even captured in good time. And maybe the internal auditors may eventually get to capture those issues when a damage has already occurred. So a useful way to think of this is the traditional model is built for slower business environment. That model alone can only work when the business is slow. But we know that we're working with a faster business environment. Although the fundamentals of the traditional model is still valid, but the operating speed of rates would make that particular model alone not to be sufficient in terms of internal auditing. I think we should imagine maybe a payment platform that processes transactions in millions, digital transactions daily. If internal audit reviews are still very periodic, small sample testing, you would find out that unusual pattern, even system overrides, and even fraud indicators may not be proactively caught in time, right? And issues may have escalated beyond remedy before assurance is provided. So the concern is not even whether traditional model should be done away with. It is rather that the model evolved, right? Such that we can incorporate, just as the business is changing, internal audit can be transformed to catch up with that pace and be able to incorporate things like data analytics, continuous monitoring, even automation, and even more forward-looking insights, just like Henry has said. To close this, I would say that internal audit cannot remain quarterly in a business environment that operates by the seconds. Thank you.
Wow, thank you for that's those contributions, right? A few things I picked up is that the fundamental is still valid, but the model was built for slower business environment. And then now the business environment is moving at a faster pace. So there need to be, the internal audit module needs to evolve because the business environment is also evolving, right? So thank you for those contributions. I would call on Henry. Henry, if you want to also share your perspective on the same subject, on if they are on how the stakeholders, how the traditional audit model is still, relevant, and then if there are areas you think are becoming inadequate.
Okay, Daniel. Yeah, so I just wanted to add, so the future for internal audit is not just abandoning totally what we are doing in traditional auditing, but it's about us augmenting it with data analytics, automation, continuous monitoring, and agile risk assessment. I just want to add that we are not totally abandoning traditional audit. There's still the foundation of it, but we have to augment it with data analytics, business analytics, automation, continuous monitoring, and risk assessment in our dealings and our operations.
Great. Thank you very much, Henry, for those contributions, right? So we'll move to audit evidence, right? If we tell process owners that a control has failed or a process is weak, we need to be able to demonstrate, how we reach that conclusion. We need to be able to show the evidence that indeed the control has failed or the process is weak, right? We've done quite a few external quality assessments. And one of the things we observed is that audit management and evidence management is still a weakness in many internal audit functions, right? So Henry, what are some of why does evidence management remains a persistent weakness in many internal audit functions? And what do you think are the consequences of that?
Okay, Daniel, yes. As you asked, why does audit evidence management remain such a persistent weakness? So it remains a persistent weakness because many audit functions in Ghana and globally still operate through fragmented manual processes. These issues include evidence spread across emails. There's a process owner sends an email, so the evidence is in your email box. You save it in different folders, and one saves in OneDrive, one else saves it in a Google Drive, different spreadsheets because there's no singular tool for managing audit evidence, and also about us how we even manage audit, our indexing, our referencing practices. Those are common issues we still find. The inconsistent documentation standards. One team member is documenting this way, another team member is documenting this way. Or even if you're doing a team going for a mission on a particular audit is documenting a different standard, another team is documenting in a different. So those are the common issues. And consequences of this are significant. So maybe an unsupported audit findings and delays during reviews, because now the audit manager wants the support evidence to finalize reports to send out. Now the evidences are lost in, as we said, in the email somewhere in different folders. And yeah, so and ultimately it helps it slows down how we even defend our audit conclusions because we don't have evidence readily available to support our conclusions. So ultimately, weak evidence management undermines the credibility of the audit function itself because we will not even look credible because now we are going to defend our conclusions or our findings. We don't even know where our evidences are. We don't look good to the stakeholders once that is, we don't know where our evidence is. And I'll just say that if evidences are stored properly, it makes us look better, it makes us defend our conclusions better. So we should encourage the habit of saving our evidences well, and referencing properly, having shared folders to keep our evidences in, and ultimately we can construct a good audit trail and we can enhance its reviews and enhances our defense of our conclusions and findings. Yes. Daniel, thank you.
Thank you, Henry. So, Henry, you have agreed with me that many internal audit functions still don't have sufficient evidence to support conclusion. But Adeolu, is large documentation of audit evidence the same as strong audit evidence? Because there's still that perception that if you have a large volume, of audit evidence, it means that, yes, you have strong evidence to support your conclusion. So what exactly separates a large volume of audit documentation from an evidence that is truly defensible? Let me hear from you, Adeolu.
Thank you, Daniel. I think that's a very good question because when we think about audit evidence, we need to start thinking quality, not quantity. So audit evidence is not about how much documentation we have. So yes, we need to delineate audit documentation from audit evidence. So when thinking about evidence, you think about what things or what documentation, right, would make my audit defensible? What can I use to support the conclusions that I've come to in my audit? So internal auditors should take both a deductive and an analytical approach to auditing, because that way, when you identify, a control gap or an exception or a risk that has materialized, you're able to think, what would support this conclusion that I have? And in thinking about that, you can then go ahead to gather evidence that is relevant to, whatever it is that you have raised. So you can have a large audit file and it might just be quantity without anything tangible to defend your audit. So when you think about it analytically, when you think about it in terms of the quality and the depth or the extent to which what you have can be supported, it leads you to the right audit evidence. So I'll conclude again by saying it is not volume, it is the quality of the evidence, is how relevant it is to the gap that you have raised, and is the strength of the link between the evidence and the opinion that you have raised from the audit.
Wow, thank you very much, Adeolu. I'll summarize your contributions as audit evidence. It's not about how much is in the file. It's about whether the file clearly supports the conclusion. Thank you so much for your responses. I'll move to Valentina. You'd agree that controls are becoming increasingly digital and automated, especially now with the whole discussions around artificial intelligence and data analytics. How should internal audit teams think about audit trail integrity and traceability?
Thank you so much, Daniel, for that question. I think that's a very important question, especially with the transformation that is happening within business environments of today. Internal auditors should think of traceability and true integrity as very central to assurance, right? Considering the fact that I'm not just simply documentation requirements. So while it's good to, yes, know that you have to document, but you need to have that perception that or the perceived value of your documentation, right, being traced, like your audit conclusion being traced back to your documentation, right? So in a digital environment and an automated environment, the question now goes beyond existence of control, right? Aside the fact that, oh, a control exists, there are other important questions. Can you demonstrate fully how this control works, what happens, who does what, and what are the triggers, right? In terms of, and in the extent of evidence you can get out from that particular transaction flow. So in this regard, auditors need to have deeper understanding of system workflows because you can only audit or review a process flow that you have an understanding of. So even automated approval logic, threshold assets on the system, access control, even change management log, what has happened, who does what change, who is initiating the change, are those change authorized, even exception handling, maybe exceptions to the system logic, how are those exceptions escalated, how they handled as well, and even system generated evidence, the extent to which those generated evidence can be able to address your review, right? Your your review really. So in terms of reviewability, it is really critical because assurance must remain independently defensible. So such that if another person takes up your workflows and try to test the same transaction path, the same audit conclusion should be reached, right? So, and that pretty much speaks to quality of assurance, right, in that regard. So I think we should even imagine an automated procurement system, right, which has approval thresholds set on the system and the level of reviews or the level of escalation before transactions are fully authorized. So the auditor should be able to understand, to be able to perform assurance in that particular process. The auditor should be able to understand the system logic, the rules that are set on the system, who those transactions are supposed to go for in terms of authorization, and being able to trace those transactions back. And I think for internal auditors, we should not mistake efficiency for assurance. So the fact that a process is automated and is efficient, it's going in real time, transaction are happening in real time, you should still consider traceability as very critical to assurance. Because if you're not able to trace a transaction to the source or how those transactions happen, how it flows on the system, eventually your assurance will become weak, right? So that's how I believe internal auditors should view traceability and also integrity of auditory. So I'll close this by saying that in digital environment, visibility is the new evidence. So what the extent to what an internal auditor can see is the new evidence. What can I see? The fact that, oh, a system is automated does not automatically mean, oh, there's an assurance on that system. But the visibility of the internal auditor, the extent of work that can be done on those systems to be able to ascertain that controls as designed are operating effectively, right? Controls are working as designed in terms of design intention and also operating effectively. And also automation without traceability can create efficiency, like I mentioned earlier, but not necessarily assurance. Thank you.
Wow, thank you very much, Val, for your contributions on the topic, right? I think one key takeaway for me is that an independent audit professional should be able to perform the same audits and arrive at the same conclusion, right? So I think that is very, very key. Thank you again, right? So I want to quickly remind our participants, our audience, to contribute to the discussions, right? So we have the chat box open. You can ask questions. You can just share your thoughts, your ideas, your comments. So just let's all participate and contribute to the discussion. We also have a link. If you don't want to type in the comment box, we have a link where you can share your ideas anonymously. So we'd really appreciate your contributions as well. Right. So we'll move on to Adeolu. I'll be coming to you. When you look at the global internal audit standards, comparing it with the old, IPPF, you realize that it is more detailed, it is clearer, but many people have argued that the level of detail in the new global internal audit standard also creates the risk where internal auditors begin to treat the global internal audit standard as a compliance checklist, right? So my question would be, how should audit teams use the new standard, not merely as a compliance checklist, but really as a guide, a trigger to improve our methodology and our audit practices?
All right, thank you, Daniel. Very important question. So looking at the new standards, right, one thing that would stand out to you when you go through the standards is that regardless of the fact that it's more detailed, which I'll come back to, it is principles-based and risk-based, right? And it forces internal auditors to think beyond a conformance or compliance approach to internal audit where, we have this list of things that the process or the function should be doing, and then we are checklisting against whether or not it's done. So it's black or white. It is yes or no, done or not done, rather than approaching it from a risk-based perspective where we look at what are the core principles that the standard is trying to establish, and checking whether or not the processes we're reviewing have adhered to those principles. So I'd say that internal auditors will need to approach it, as a catalyst for transformation. It should be an opportunity to look how internal audit is being done and see how it can be improved. And I'll speak to it from these 5 areas, one of which you identified. So the methodology, technology, the skills and competencies, the reporting, and then quality assurance. So when we look at the methodology itself, what we've had in the past are static audit work programs. So for example, you have a work program for finance to reporting, which, hasn't changed in 5 years. So with every audit, the auditor picks it up, goes to the process owner, reviews documents, same documentation. So the new standards are forcing us to think beyond that kind of approach when it comes to our methodology to more of like an agile, risk-responsive approach. So this means that our programs are changing as risks are changing. The internal auditor is also very aware of emerging risks, to be able to update their methodology in line with what is happening in this very fast-paced environment. When we look at technology, the standards also challenge functions to think of how assurance is delivered in this digital age, right? So the conversation now moves from whether or not internal audit teams should apply technology to whether the function can remain relevant without it. That is almost impossible. And then when we talk about skills and competencies, it elevates the skills of internal auditors from just internal audit to being business partners. Internal auditors must know how the business functions. That's a given. But beyond that, internal auditors must also have knowledge around, emerging risks, the AI, cybersecurity, and more importantly, the soft skills, so communication skills, business acumen, the way we think. So internal auditors are moving from just policemen, like people used to call them, to business partners who can participate in the business from day to day. And then when we talk about reporting, in my earlier response, I talked about lengthy reports being the trademark of internal auditors, and internal auditors being, measuring their success against how many gaps they're able to raise, whether relevant or irrelevant. But now reporting can be streamlined to what is more beneficial to the stakeholders, the decision makers. So the board audit committee has so much on their desk, for example. They do not have the time to be going through pages and pages of report. So internal auditors must be able to report concisely And in being concise, must be able to touch on the key points, that would benefit the organization and would help the decision makers make the right decision. And finally, quality assurance. Internal audit functions would think about quality assurance as that, mandatory process. For some organizations, it is mandatory, where they see it as a periodic activity. But the standard pushes us to now think about the quality assurance as something that needs to be embedded in the regular internal audit cycle. So, for example, in your planning, you must think quality assurance. In your execution, you must think quality assurance. In your reporting as well, you must think quality assurance. So it elevates the excellence that internal audit is able to, show forth in the organization, and also elevates internal audit themselves as a business partner within the organization.
Wow, thank you. Thank you, Adeolu, for those comments. One very key item you said was it's almost impossible for internal audit functions to operate without technology. So it's no longer a discussion on whether or not technology is important or crucial for the internal audit function. And still on the global internal audit standard, one of the key requirements in the global internal audit standard is for the functions to adopt technology. This is a major requirement in the new global internal audit standards, right? So I would want to ask Valentina, right, and also building on what Adeolu had already said, that it's almost impossible for the internal audit function to function, without adopting technology. So what technology or digital capabilities are now becoming non-negotiable for the internal audit function, especially for high-performing internal audit teams? And why are these technologies or capabilities no longer a nice to have, but a must have?
Thank you so much, Daniel, for that question. I think the team has really been speaking so much on technology, which is the future. I mean, the future is now already. Technologies, there are several capabilities that is no longer negotiable for internal audit function. And these capabilities, they have mentioned some of which includes like your data analytics. It's now even the high performing teams are basically already analyzing transactions even before they come in for the field. They've already identified patterns, errors, or outliers in spools already, even before the audit starts in itself. Even workflows enabled audit management systems, centralized evidence repository, where everyone has the visibility on what is happening on the project, real-time issues tracking as well, that helps the auditors keep track of findings, both past findings, remediation action as well. Even this visibility can even extend to even the process owners themselves. Dashboard reporting, where you report to the highest level of governance, the board, even senior management as well. Data analytics can even help you with preparing dashboards like a Power BI for reporting purposes. So even continuous monitoring capabilities that can be embedded in systems, in ERP, such that maybe a procurement system, those capabilities can be deployed on it, such that those systems can be able to track outliers, system overrides, or anything relating to transactions that doesn't flow in the pattern in which it's supposed to flow. Even understanding of automated control and AI supported processes is also very key and non-negotiable for high performing auditing. And for organizations, as the fact that organizations are now mostly skewed towards digital platform, they have large data sets they process even daily, automated processes are becoming automated. The function cannot provide timely or sufficient assurance when they keep using things like spreadsheets, manual testing, or even emails. I think we should imagine auditing revenue assurance, for example, like revenue, you want to assess revenue leakage manually across millions of transactions. Traditional sampling may just even give you just one or two issues, whereas there are major issues that may be hidden in those transactions. But because the manual scope is limited, you may not be able to get a fair view of what is happening within those transactions. But data analytics or analytics can review the entire population and immediately identify duplicate payments, unusual trends, even override patterns, even segregation conflicts, or maybe approval rights that are not working as it's supposed to be. So let's even speak of repository, centralized repository. If internal auditors continue with fragmented files, individuals having documents in their desktop, or maybe evidences littered in emails, if a regulator just comes up and then asks for a particular test that was done, for a significant audit conclusion that was reached, and they just come and want to see, oh, the evidences, they want you to retrieve the evidences immediately to support your audit conclusion. You find out that those internal auditors may struggle, and also in terms of timeliness, in terms of tendering that report, they may struggle, because you would then see people trying to check individual desktop to be able to retrieve. But a centralized repository gives visibility to even the audit supervisor, leadership themselves. They can see, oh, what's happening in real time with the engagement. People can add value, provide insight. Even team members, even audit supervisors, they can provide insight as well. And when those information are requested for promptly, you can just easily go to the repository, get out those evidences, and share with those in need of the information. And the question, just to close this, the question is no longer does internal audits or technology improve internal audit? It's rather whether can audit remain effective without it. Thank you very much.
Wow, thank you very much, Val. Thank you very much. There are some keywords that I've heard a lot in this session. Things like data-driven auditing, continuous auditing, data analytics. I want to be sure that we really understand what this terminology means, especially for internal auditors. So practically in our day-to-day, activities as internal auditors, what does continuous auditing mean? What does data-driven auditing mean? So Adeolu, could you assist with this? Thank you.
All right, thank you, Daniel. And I think Valentina did, good justice to, what technology even means when we talk about internal audits. So we'll be hearing the words, they're like buzzwords now, data-driven audits, continuous audit and assurance, and just to bring it into context and define what it means, I'll start from the term data-driven. In traditional auditing, one of the characteristics is that it's sample-based. As internal auditors, we're very familiar with the term sampling methodology, sampling techniques, because in the past, we've well the understanding that the way we sample, how we are able to, go around the entire population and, pick those things that would be representative of the population for review, can define the quality of our audits. But because the world is moving really fast, and one thing that is defining how technology is evolving is data. We started from 1 MB of space being sufficient till now we have gigabytes and, zillions of space being used for data right now. So we have a very fast-paced world today, and what is representative of that is data. So when we say data-driven internal audits, we are looking at how we can make use of the data within the organization, to draw audit conclusions or to identify control gaps. So instead of auditing a sample of a population, what auditors are doing right now in adhering to technology is auditing the entire population. So when we say data-driven, think of auditing the entire population of data as against samples. And then when we talk about continuous assurance, we're talking about, rather than having retrospective audits where we audit processes every 6 months, and then we're looking back at what has happened in the past 6 months, continuous assurance is having checks and reviews done daily using technology, and flagging control gaps as they happen, rather than waiting for after the fact flagging to happen. So what this would look like in today's world is that you have technology that is integrated with the organization's ERP, and you have defined key risk indicators that internal audit is tracking. And the technology is able to take that data from the ERP, ingest it, analyze it, and then flag key risk indicators on a daily or on a regular basis. I'll give an example. In the procure to pay process, the three-way match is one of the controls, that we have in that process, where you have to match the purchase order with the invoice and the goods received note. Now, in a data-driven or continuous assurance environment, the team can analyze 100% of that data as it is happening, right? So you have a system that is analyzing every purchase order and checking that it has an invoice and checking that it has a GRN on the go. And where it identifies an anomaly, it flags it immediately, both for the internal auditor, the process owner, and any other key stakeholder involved in that process, right? So just by doing that, you can identify invoices processed without POs, payments made before goods are received, duplicate payments, and several other flags can be identified. So in essence, I would say that technology alone, in conclusion, I'll say that technology alone doesn't create continuous assurance. It has to do with all the parts coming together. For one, an organization has to have comprehensive data, clean data, structured data, and it must have moved from manual processes to mostly automated processes before you can begin thinking automation or continuous assurance. So it's a process, and it's something that would have to involve the entire organization and not just the internal audit function. The goal is not to generate more data, but to be able to have timely and relevant data that would give assurance on the risk within the environment or within the organization.
Thank you, Adeolu, for that response. Data is indeed defining how technology is evolving. And this means that for the institutions present on this call, if you want your internal audit function to evolve, you need to look at your data. And I think it's time for us to start paying more attention to how we generate, how we store and analyze our data sets. And I also believe that the terminologies are clear now: continuous auditing and data-driven auditing. So thank you very much, Adeolu. I'll move on to Henry, right? So yes, we've spoken about using technology, using AI, but I feel we need to be careful, because when you look at the recent scandals that has happened, right, where audit teams leverage artificial intelligence and generative AI, output without sufficient professional skepticism, without human judgment, and then present the reports to the clients. And some of this AI-generated output could come out so confidently, meanwhile, it's misleading and inaccurate. So my question would be that how do we balance automation, data analytics, AI-enabled insights with the professional skepticism that has always been the foundation of internal auditing, and also human judgment? How do we incorporate human judgment in the loop? All right, so Henry, please.
Okay, Daniel, yes, thank you. So the key word is balance, automation, analytics, AI with professional judgment, human judgment, and so we should know technology should enhance our human judgment, not replace it. We were here before technology, so technology is here to enhance our human judgment, not replace it. Analytics, AI are extremely powerful, very, very powerful. You put in a script, so you put in a prompt, they bring out responses for you. So they are good for us, for internal auditors. They help us to identify some anomalies. They expand our audit coverage, because just with a human or just a manual process, you can't have a big coverage. It helps us expand our coverage. It helps us detect some patterns that we wouldn't have seen with our human judgment. It is improving efficiency, as we have discussed earlier. The AI analytics is also improving efficiency. It's predicting potential high-risk areas within our system. However, Data does not always explain context or intent or behavioral risk. So professional skepticism always remains critical. As we know, data can be incomplete, it can be biased. Some of these algorithms can reinforce the flawed assumptions because they want to please you. Exceptions may have some valid explanations that the data doesn't know about, or the AI doesn't know about, the analytics doesn't know about, and there's some contextual context and cultural context that the data analytics tool or the AI enabled tool doesn't know. So maybe an AI tool may flag some transactions based on some historical trend as low risk. However, an experienced auditor in the field may recognize that the transactions had involved some vendor which is linked to conflict of interest that is not um, clearly stated in the system, so that AI or the tool didn't detect or contextualize. So all I'm saying is that strong internal auditors must define or must combine their technical capability with business understanding. That is very key. You have to understand the business based on the data and all of that. So combine your analytics, your data tools you're using with business understanding, inquiry and challenge. There are some results from the AI you have to challenge, you have to inquire about, you have to use your professional skepticism on it, and also ultimately use your sound professional judgment when you're analyzing these things. There's tools, there's AI, there's analytics, there's some automation, but the human judgment counts. So the future is not simply data driven, it is insight driven. From the beginning, I've been saying insight, insight, insight. So with the data driven insights you get, you should be add a professional skepticism, challenge, inquire, and be insight driven. Um, Technology can make assurance faster and broader, but as we say, professional skepticism keeps it credible and defensible so that we can also defend it to our audit committee, to stakeholders, to regulators when they come around. Yes, Daniel, thank you for.
Thank you, Henry, for those responses. Indeed, credibility is a hallmark for internal auditors, and we can't avoid to lose that credibility because we've neglected professional skepticism, in our audits process. So that is very key. Let's remember that the human judgment counts. The technology is there to support our internal audit activities and practices, but not there to replace it. So thank you. That is very, very insightful, Henry. All right, so I would move on to Adeolu. Adeolu, the main business case for technology has always been efficiency. At least that's what I've read, and that's what I know, right? That efficiency, when you adopt technology, your audit will be faster, you would have less working paper in fragmented, places, right? But aside efficiency, right, what other benefits does technology bring to the internal audit function? And more importantly, at what point does the absence of a good audit management technology become more of an efficiency problem, more than an efficiency problem? Thank you.
Okay, great question. So when we talk about, bringing in technology to internal audit processes, I would say it's not for everyone at this point, because if we still have organizations with very small data, it's rare to see. But if we still have organizations with very small data, slow moving environments, their traditional approaches might still work for them, right? So technology starts becoming an efficiency issue when the lack of it starts to impair the quality of the work. And not just the quality, the consistency, how consistently the internal auditors are able to apply their methodology quarter in, quarter out, and how they are able to also defend their audit work. So that's talking about audit evidence right now, right? So if the audit teams are relying on fragmented filing, you have the audit file in one place, you have it manually printed in a file, and then the evidences you have are stored in a OneDrive folder. and then you just have all the audit documents in different silos, it becomes a quality problem. It also affects the way that reporting is going to be done. It affects the way that the audit is going to be traced. So the audit supervisor, for example, might need to follow the audit to identify what stage the audit currently is, and where there are reviews that are expected to be done might need to come in. So it makes everything just fragmented in silos, leading to limited supervision and then reduced visibility. So what I would say is that at this point, the organization is more or less exposed to governance and assurance risk, because the leadership may not then have a clear view of what's going on, right? The reporting will become inconsistent. So the team might report on something in a particular quarter, and in the next quarter, they might not be able to properly follow up or report on a reoccurrence of that because the methodology is inconsistent, right? So it goes beyond just an efficiency issue. It becomes a quality issue. It becomes an issue of limited supervision. It becomes an issue of limited assurance, limited visibility by the key stakeholders as well. And like I said, it would affect how internal audit is able to defend their conclusions, and even to regulatory and external bodies.
Thank you, Adeolu. So quality issues, limited assurance, limited visibility. So it's more than just an efficiency problem. Thank you for those responses. I think we have quite a number of questions from our participants. So we'd want to give room for you to address those questions. So I would quickly move on to Valentina. Let's just wrap up with our conversations, and then we can move to the question and answers. Valentina, so what would distinguish a high-performing internal audit team from those that fall behind, especially in the world shaped by AI, digital risk, and then just stronger global, expectations and demand from the internal audit function?
Thank you so much, Daniel, for that question. Looking ahead, high-performing audit teams would distinguish by themselves by their ability to incorporate the modern capabilities into the traditional method or the traditional model, which is foundational to internal auditing, right? The strongest teams will be grounded in the independence, professional skepticism, sound judgment, which is pretty much still very vital to the profession of internal auditing. But they will also do more in terms of agility, being able to be dynamic in the approach and in the way they conduct their activities, be more data driven, like we mentioned, and even more technology aware, right? Following up with the pace at which the business is changing, trying to understand what is happening within the business front, and also getting to know what are the stakeholders' pain points, and being able to tailor the internal audit plan in that regard, right? Not just having like a internal audit plan that is just there, not changing, So the internal audits of today, I mean, the high-performing internal audit team should be more risk-driven, right? Being able to add value to the business, which is pretty much the purpose of internal auditing, which is to create, sustain, and also to protect organization value, right? The things that will fall behind are likely those that see technology as optional, right? In the world of today, and also with the business of today and the way things are changing, technology is now, organizations are going digital, automations here and there. And the internal audit method of the past may not just be sufficient. So high-performing teams should try as much as possible to incorporate the modern methodologies, right, in their approach as well. Leading internal audit teams are already using data analytics to identify emerging trends, like most of the speakers have mentioned, even before like the audit engagement even begin. And those are valuable insights, being able to show and be able to demonstrate that you understand the business, you are following the business as the business is growing, and also you're able to identify the risk the issues, the major issue of the business as well, and not just in the identification perspective, and also being able to tailor your recommendation in such a way that the recommendation can add value to the business, right? Even some are integrating continuous monitoring to some high risk processes, right? Others are building stronger collaboration with technology experts, those tech risk auditors, and also cyber security auditors as well. Collaborate in such a way that the audit is holistic, it can address every risk, right, in the business, including data privacy. Those auditors that have that capabilities as well. They are collaborating with these teams and ensuring that they're able to improve assurance coverage. Meanwhile, less mature function may still spend weeks trying to compile audit evidence manually, still going through the manual route. That may not be sustainable, and that is not the future of internal audit. Neither is it going to stand the test of time. To close this, the future belongs to audit teams that can move at the speed of risk without compromising assurance quality. And in the years ahead, stakeholders would evaluate or assess the internal audit function, not only by the volume of report it produces, but by how quickly and clearly and credibly it is able to help the organization respond to emerging risks. Thank you.
Thank you, Val. Thank you for those responses. Indeed, a high-performing internal audit function in the age of AI and technology, right, is expected to be more agile, dynamic in our approach, and most importantly, the internal audit function will not be left behind. We are not playing catch-up, right? Internal audits, as we know it now, and the expectations from the regulators, from the global internal audit standard, is we should provide foresight and insights to the organization. So we shouldn't be playing catch-up. We should actually be advising the organization and the business on emerging risk, and also the technology that can help the organization. So that's very, very well presented. Thank you, Valentina. We'll move on to our last question before we enter the question and answer session. So Adeolu, but before that, since we've said so much about data analytics, I just wanted to inform our participants and our audience that we will be having a data analytics training on modern data analytics for internal auditors, and that would happen within the 15th and the 16th of July, right? So we are inviting you. The flyer will be posted in the chat box. So that's just by the way. So moving on to that, the last question, right? Adeolu, if an audit leaders, and we have quite a number of chief internal auditors, we have head of audits present on this call, if they are convinced that their current audit process is still manual, still fragmented, difficult to defend, what should they do? What are the practical steps? Let's say within the next 30 to 60 days, what are some of the practical steps? What are some of the first steps that they should take? All right, Adeolu.
All right. So if an audit leader, takes a look at their function, and someone is listening to this conversation and saying, okay, there needs to be a change in the way we approach our audits, but where do we start from? I'd say that the first thing to do is to have an honest diagnostic or a review of current processes to know where the function currently is. We have several maturity roadmap for the internal audit functions. For KPMG, we have, a maturity scale as well, where we're able to assess, how mature an internal audit function is based on their use of technology. So the first thing to do would be to conduct an assessment, a maturity assessment of the function. Where are the places that are still painfully manual and could be improved? Now, like I said earlier, when we talk about automation, especially for internal auditors, it is very dependent on the level of automation present within the organization. So if the organization has been able to automate 90% of its processes, but internal audit is still, say, 90% manual, then there's a huge gap, and internal audit is not keeping pace with the organization. But when you have an organization that is still largely manual in its processes, internal audit may not be able to automate, as easily as it expects. So I would say that if the audit leader is in the second category, where you have, most of the organization's processes already automated, but internal audit is still lagging behind, the first thing to do is to conduct an assessment. After conducting an assessment, you may then want to pick 1 to 3 high impact areas, we call them low hanging fruits that can be automated. For example, if you take a look at the audit management itself, from planning to reporting and recommendation tracking, if that's still being done using, manual Excel sheets, sending emails here and there, you may want to consider adopting an internal audit management solution, that can bring all of those together before you even begin to automate the audit analysis in itself, right? So I would say that, again, the first thing to do is to conduct an assessment of the current maturity phase. Then the next thing to do would be to identify 1 to 3 high impact areas if you want to, move forward within the next 6 months.
Great. Thank you, Adeolu. First, conduct an assessment, and then you can start with tackling the low-hanging fruit. And KPMG is always there to, support you. We can help with this assessment just to identify the maturity of your internal audit function in terms of adopting technology and data analytics. And then you can look at the low-hanging fruit, see what can be automated first, right? With the whole goal and objective of improving the internal audit function. Thank you so much, our speakers. And I believe our participants, you've been informed. We've received quite very, very substantial, education from this webinar, right? So we have quite a number of questions from our audience, our participants. I'll just go ahead to read a few, and then our speakers can address them, right? All right, so I would want to ask Valentina, someone is asking which audit activities should be automated first to improve quality. So let me ask that, yes, Valentina, this, which audit activities should be automated first to improve quality?
Thank you so much, Daniel, for that question. I think Adeolu has deliberated and spoken to that. To start with, you start with high volume and repetitive rule-based tasks where automation gives the quickest win. So tasks that are high volume, they are repetitive, and you've been able to assess that particular process to ascertain that automation would help in that particular process. Data extraction and also reconciliation, things like your GL, your payroll, even vendor master data. That too is also something that automation can improve. Sampling and population testing as well, right? The fact that automation can help you sample 100%. So like Adeolu had mentioned, if the process is already automated in itself, it is easier to use an automation and a data analytics or any form of technology to be able to assess that process, because the process in itself is already automated. So your sampling methodology and also your population testing can also be improved by technology. Control testing for access rights as well, segregation of duty and journal entries. Like I mentioned earlier, once you know how the rules are set on the system, you can be able to test those rights and also segregation of duties to be able to ascertain that if system is working as designed, and also the operating effectiveness as well. So because it's not just about, oh, does the control exist, like I mentioned, it's more of, is the control being able to operate as it is designed, right? Working papers, documentation, and audit reporting, drafting. Your working papers, the fact that you can document online, right, such that everybody on the team has visibility right? They can be able to view and add value. So insights can come up during the course of the review. That visibility in itself is you're able to collate different insights, being able to gather, oh, what is one expect, especially when you're performing an audit that is maybe branch specific, or internal auditors are within several branches. You can be able to get insight based on visibility on the working papers that every other person is working on. Audit reports drafting too, that too can be automated such that reviews are happening real time. You're addressing the comments real time as well, such that when the output is being requested, right, you're able to meet up with the timelines, right, for delivery. Continuous monitoring as well. I think we've dwelt on that, of key risk indicators and exception reports. So the fact that, oh, you can incorporate continuous monitoring tools on a particular process, or a process that is automated, like a procurement process, so that it can be able to flag key risk indicator, draw your attention to it, and then you too, as an auditor, can now bring into it your judgment, your professional skepticism into assessing, oh, what the system has already done. Rule of thumb is automate what is repeatable, data heavy, low judgment first, keep human focus on then risk assessment, and then conclusion of the review. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you. I believe you have addressed the question in depth. I'll quickly move on to the next question. Someone is asking, what tools can help auditors track evidence requests, responses, and outstanding items more effectively? So any of our speakers, Adeolu, do you want to?
Okay, so I would say there are a plethora of tools around today. One thing audit teams should think about is, first of all, their current maturity state, and I would say, what they want to get out of the use of the tool. For speaking to the tools themselves, we have dedicated audit management platforms. For example, we have the KPMG Risk Hub, which is an end-to-end internal audit management solution. And there are a lot of internal audit management solutions, out there that can. One of the key focuses I'm seeing these days is being able to track, recommendations and evidence requests. So you need to assess the functionalities of each of those solutions to see whether or not you can, upload data on them, and whether or not the auditees can have access to those tools to update, the status of the recommendations that IA has provided. So you have general workflow tools if the internal audit function is not looking for anything, particularly heavy or end-to-end. So talking about even SharePoint, which we currently use, is one tool that, which, is popularly used, is one tool that can be very useful, if the function hasn't gotten to that point where they want a standalone solution. So SharePoint will be able to show you what the status of a particular documentation is. It also has the ability to accommodate large amounts of data depending on, the version that the organization is subscribed to. You're able to see the owners of the data, the dates, those were uploaded, and, all those simpler basic functions that you need. So to summarize it, I would say that depending on your maturity level and your current needs, there are a plethora of tools. If you are still in the early stages and you need something that can just, track and, monitor how current the data is and all of those, you can use SharePoint, and then you can move on to more dedicated internal audit management solutions that stand alone, like the KPMG Risk Hub, and a lot of those that are in the marketplace.
Excellent. Thank you, Adeolu. Thank you for that response. I believe you've answered the question sufficiently, right? So yes, depending on your maturity level, right, if you want an internal audit management solution, an end-to-end internal audit management solution that can help you with your audit process, right from planning to reporting, right? So KPMG Risk Hub, it's an internal audit management solution that is built on IBM Open Pages. And this solution is also built with the expertise of KPMG risk professionals, which means that you'll be getting consultancy, free consultancy in terms of templates and best practices that KPMG professional risk and internal audit professionals have supported several institutions with. And if you are interested, you can always reach out to us after the webinar. So I'll move on to the next question. Someone wants to know, what controls should internal audit put around the use of AI tools in audit work? So any of our speakers can answer this.
All right, thanks, Daniel. I would like to speak to that, and I welcome additional contributions from the other panelists. So, in my opinion, AI tools should be seen as an assistant. They are not to replace the internal auditor. So, when we talk about jobs that IA should, that AI would take over, internal audits shouldn't be mentioned as one that should completely be taken over by AI, because the internal auditor themselves are bringing professional judgment, as one of the major aspects of the work that we do. I think it was Henry who said earlier that there might be conclusions that an AI tool may reach that have other context within the organization that only the auditor or the process owner can provide. Having said that, when looking at the use of AI, one of the first things the organization and the internal audit function should consider is the fact that AI tools may be biased, right? They can also have errors, and having that understanding, that the way a model is trained would affect the output it gives. It's more or less garbage in, garbage out. So if you have an AI tool, for example, there was a time where there were reports that an AI tool were assigning lower credit scores to women than to men. And when they dug deeper, they realized that it's because the model was trained with data that was available in a period where automatically men were given higher credit scores. So you could have those nuances, and it means that when approaching the adoption, you must understand that there will be bias. So the organization should have one key control is a clear AI use policy. Not everything should be used with AI. They should delineate what kind of data can be loaded into an AI solution and which cannot. You also need to think about confidentiality in that aspect. For an organization that deals with client data, using an open source AI tool would pose serious issues, regulatory issues, and even legal issues for an organization. So there should be data protection rules as well on how you want to protect confidential data from being loaded into those models. Then you should have human review. No matter what AI model is being used, every output must be reviewed by a human being. And there should be a sign off to evidence that review has been done. I would also say version control and audit trail. And one key thing will be transparency. The internal auditor to be able to explain how AI was used in a particular audit, what amount of data was uploaded, what was the quality of outputs received, and what updates were made to that output themselves. In summary, I'm going to say that internal auditors should even consider themselves as important in providing assurance over the use of AI in the entire organization, because we are moving to a time whereby internal auditors won't just be auditing processes, they would also be auditing AI models. As organizations are adopting AI solutions, internal auditors would also have to provide assurance on the reliability of that tool. So our awareness should go beyond even our own use of AI to how the entire organization is using AI and how we can provide assurance on those models for the entire organization.
Excellent. Thank you, Adeolu. All right. So, Henry, would you want to?
I'll just reiterate on what Adiola said about the clear AI use policy that tells us about the approved tools, the approved cases, how you manage data you upload on it, the prompts you give it, the amount of information you feed into it, because your organization's data is confidential. So you should know what to put on AI and how much to put on AI. And clearly, training too is important. There's a policy but there should be training, there should be capacity building on why we should use AI, what you should put in AI, give the awareness, grow the awareness within the entity on what AI should be used for, what are the limits for it, what can't we upload on it. So for internal auditors for the organization as a whole, there should be training, there should be continuous awareness, we should build our competencies in it because AI is here to help us. We should care for what we put on it and what it generates for us. And we should, as I said, human judgment is always ultimate. We know we were here before technology and we should be able to assess whatever it gives us. And before we add it to our reports, before we add it to our discussion documents, our presentations, we should review what AI gives us and that will help us to just use AI well and efficiently.
Excellent, excellent. Thank you, Henry. So someone is asking, how can you get quality assurance in an actuarial report for insurance company? I guess the person is in the insurance space. So any of our speakers. All right. So any of our speakers who want to address that, how can you get quality assurance in an actuarial report for insurance company?
Yes, Daniel. I'm trying to analyze this question to provide a perfect. How can we get quality assurance, actual report? Quality assurance as an internal auditor is by the way we document our evidence, as we have discussed. Audit quality, we need to make sure that we have the right documentation, the right support, the right evidence management, so that our reports are defensible, they are credible within the organization. Whatever we report on our conclusions, we need to make sure that there's quality in our evidence, there's reliable, it's efficient, and it's sufficient so that we are able to defend whatever conclusions we come up with.
All right, thank you, Henry. So what I get from your contribution is the same approach and framework that you use for audit quality in the insurance industry, in the banking sector, whichever space you find yourself, the framework are applicable across, right? So, and you've just highlighted a few of the points that we had discussed earlier. So I'll quickly move on to the next question. Someone is asking, if an auditor reaches the correct conclusion, but the supporting audit evidence and documentation are weak and insufficient, can that audit still be considered a high quality from a professional standard perspective? So any of our speakers can take that.
Okay, so let me take that. I know I earlier said that internal audit is not a police. The function used to be seen as policemen, and people used to be wary of internal audit. Yes, we are not a police, but I would say that we should approach audit evidence the same way a lawyer would approach evidence in courts to make a case. So in practical terms, and to give a simple response to the question, the answer would generally be no, because your audit conclusion is only as strong as the evidence that you have to support it. So even when an auditor arrives at a correct conclusion, the first question, which is by the way, would be to say, how could you even say it's a correct conclusion when you don't have evidence that would support it? So when an auditor arrives at a conclusion they deem to be correct, but the evidence is weak, it's poorly documented, and you're not able to defend the exception, with the evidence that you have, it means that the case can easily be thrown away if you look at it, from a legal perspective. So the question is, how would you come to that conclusion? Without quality evidence, because your evidence should determine your conclusion. And just like Valentina said, the thing around audit evidence is that another auditor should be able to look at your documentation, should be able to look at your evidences and come to the same conclusions that you have come to, and that defeats that entire principle, in essence. And one of the common weaknesses that we see is the reliance on inquiry, I would say, where auditors ask process owners and basically just stick to what was said by the process owners rather than then doing the work to get evidence to back up whatever claim it is. So if an auditor has said something, and if a process owner has said something, and the auditor takes it and runs with it and documents it, and there's nothing to corroborate what has been documented, it makes the report unreliable, right? So I'll say that in summary, the major thing we should be aiming for when we talk about audit documentation and evidence gathering is what is the best evidence to defend this exception or this control gap that has been raised, and how can that be presented to the decision makers in a way that they can make decisions to move the organization forward based on what is presented.
All right, thank you. And I believe, Salvation Musa, I believe your question has been answered. You can give us a thumbs up if the question has been addressed sufficiently. Thank you, Adeolu. All right, so someone is asking, what are the most common weaknesses you see in audit evidence, and how can internal auditors avoid them?
Okay, Daniel, yeah, I think I'll take this. As Ade just said, the verbal confirmation. I think that's the most common weakness in the audit evidence. We just getting verbal confirmations. However, we should get more than that to support our findings and our conclusions. So verbal confirmations is one of the most common weaknesses. And using like printouts, a screenshot submitted by the auditee without verifying the source or the integrity of the printout. Because mostly we are supposed to go out there and get the printout ourselves or the screenshot from the tool or the software the auditee is using. So using screenshots without verifying the source of those screenshots even is also a common weakness. And maybe sample sizes that are not strategic, and that's another common weakness, and also are not risk based. So we have no risk in mind before we look at samples of which sampling methodology we should look at. So sampling sizes, yeah. So mostly around verbal communication, that's a common weakness. The screenshots that are not, we don't know the source, and the sampling sizes too. I don't know if any of the panel members have any additional common weaknesses they have noticed that we should avoid as internal auditors.
Okay, just
All
to
right.
add to what Harry has said, I would just like to add. So, an internal auditor should avoid assumptions, and most of the times, like Adeolu mentioned, which is just hearing or maybe getting information verbally. So, that itself, maybe you've just heard something verbally. The rule of thumb is that you probe further. You try to get views into what you've heard, right? As much as possible, try to see are there documentations, right, that you can use to support whatever conclusion you draw from that deep dive into the reviews or trying to assess that particular situation. Once you're able to get it, and I think internal auditors, especially the younger ones, should not get excited like very easily. Maybe someone just tells you, oh, there's an error in this process or there is something here, you just get excited without even going into the details. The idea is that you should, as a professional, review or assess that particular situation to check, oh, is there substance in it, what has been said, right? And also gathering as much evidence, because as much as you may think, you may consider, oh, this finding is accurate, you should consider it as, if I want to describe it to an audience or maybe the stakeholders involved? How am I able to put it out there such that there's no there's no that aspect where they are trying to fight back or trying to disregard your conclusions, right? So that you can gather enough evidence to be able to drive home your points, right? And also that speaks to the fact of defensibility. Our profession is only credible when whatever you're putting in writing, you can defend it, right? And that speaks to how much information you have in hand to defend that audit conclusion. So it is very important to ensure that the evidences, you are able to gather evidence for every particular finding or for every conclusion you're making in terms of internal audits. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you. All right. So I think Bernard asked that question. Bernard, I believe your question has been answered. There's another one from Salvation Musa. In practice, how should internal auditors respond when they have strong suspicions of fraud or control manipulation, but cannot obtain sufficient evidence because management controls access to key information? So how should internal auditors respond when they have strong suspicion of fraud or control manipulation, but cannot obtain sufficient evidence because management control access to key information? All right. So,
all right.
Any of the speakers?
Just quickly respond to that. Thank you so much, Daniel, for that question. I will start by saying that a suspicion is not a finding, right? The fact that, there's a suspicion, it may be a red flag, right? It's not a reportable finding. And there are steps you need to put in place to be able to drop a conclusion on the suspicion, right? The first thing to do is to document the suspicion and also assess objectively, right, the specifics or the events or the situation relating to that particular suspicion. Then you can possibly then escalate beyond the level being obstructed. You can escalate it to probably your supervisors or the audit leadership to be able to still get their own perception in terms of relating to that suspicion that is raised, right? And also you can then expand your procedures, right? Such that you are able to get to the nitty-gritties around that suspicion, right? You can then look at what process or what ways, right, or what internal audit methodology am I able to deploy, right, to be able to, so things like should I review whistleblowing information, should I review related party transaction since it's instances of fraud, or should I look at third party confirmation as well, or generally public records. So you have to tie your procedures to what evidence you may be able to pick out the substance over form, right, in terms of the suspicion that is being raised. Then another thing you can do is consider engaging a forensic specialist, right, because that's a specialty for things relating to fraud. If the capability does not lie within the internal audit function, you may consider introducing a forensic specialist. And another bit is if there is any limitation, right, in terms of your ability to assess that should be put in writing, and any unresolved scope limitation as well in terms of documents you're able to retrieve to support your reviews of that particular suspicion, the extent to which you can go and the scope limitation as well, you have to document it too. Then you have to know the time or the instances where you have to involve a legal counsel or even a regulator after getting the hands-on on or what the issue really is. So to close this, I would say that the idea is not just only to say, I have a suspicion and just escalating it without getting into the nitty-gritties of what the issues are. The idea is generally trying as much as possible within your capacity as the internal audit function to do your homework, so to speak, relating to the audit methodologies that you're deploying. And then when this goes beyond what the team or the function then you can consider getting a forensic specialist to address that particular suspicion. Thank you.
Thank you, Val. Before we move to the next question, I want to read a comment from a contribution rather from Yusuf. He said, I agree with the suggestion that the traditional audit approach, which focus largely on compliance and hindsight reviews, should be balanced with a more modern approach that provides foresight and insight to the business. What we also need is to appreciate that delivering such value requires different level of skills and experience. The traditional audit model makes it easier for junior staff to execute audits using standard audit programs, especially in mature and stable environments where there is high degree of predictability. However, technology, regulations, risk, and business processes are evolving much faster today, making predictability increasingly difficult. As a result, organizations cannot continue to rely mainly on entry-level resources for this more complex and forward-looking engagement. I thought this is a very brilliant contribution. Thank you, Yusuf Wasil, for that contribution. All right, so someone is asking, Asari is asking, how do we reconcile the assertion that an independent internal audit should arrive at the same findings, considering that a resident internal auditor is privy to and exposed to certain operational facts, historical context, and informal information that an external or independent auditor may never have access to, which sometimes seems with external financial statement auditors. I think this is a very interesting question. So I would leave it to my speakers, please.
All right, so let me take that. I think the confusion here is the fact that we are confusing facts for the standards themselves, right? So when we're talking about two separate things. What the standard says is that two competent auditors, when applying the standards, right, to the same evidence, should be able to come to the same conclusion. So two competent auditors applying the standards, not the facts now, right? Applying the standards to the same evidence should be able to come to the same conclusion. That is what the standard requires. So a resident internal auditor may have, the knowledge of how the organization operates, how usually they recognize patterns within the organization and all of that. But an external or independent auditor, has fresher eyes, and I would say would even be more independent than an internal auditor within the organization who has sort of become familiar with, maybe the processes, the people, and all of that. So they are less likely to be captured by familiarity. Those are two different things, and which could be an advantage or a disadvantage, in the way you look at it. But the reconciliation is this. So findings on documented facts and, the controls that are tested should come together at the end of the day, right? You're looking at things that are easily traceable. So you should be able to document them, and they should actually, at the end of the day, come together when you look at it holistically. And the resident auditor's contextual knowledge, or I'll say historical knowledge, is an asset for, assessment, for scoping and the likes. But every conclusion must still be documented, and it must still be verifiable. And that's one thing that marks good audit practices, good audit documentation practice. So while your institutional knowledge or general knowledge of the organization, can help you in your assessment, can help you in how you scope the audit, when it comes to your documentation, when it comes to your evidence gathering, right, another auditor external to the organization must still be able to come to the same conclusion, right? So your knowledge of the organization as a resident auditor, your knowledge of familiarity with the processes and people should not affect your conclusions and should not affect your documentation. That's what makes you independent as an internal auditor. So in summary, I'll say the same facts, same conclusions, and different lenses are fine, as long as the working file on what you have documented will be able to convince an outsider that you have actually done a good job as an independent auditor.
Excellent. Thank you, Adeolu. And Asari, I believe your question has been answered. You can give a reaction just to confirm that, right? So we might not be able to address all the questions on this call, but I want to assure you that all your questions will be answered. We'll send you an email with the responses to the questions for all the questions that we're not able to address on the call because of time. And thanks for understanding. Emmanuel is asking, as a junior internal audit staff, how can I effectively persuade my chief audit executive to adopt and integrate technology into the internal audit function to improve efficiency and overall audit effectiveness?
Okay, Daniel. Let me attempt to take this question. As a junior internal audit staff, I've been a junior internal audit staff before, and I've been trying to persuade my seniors to adopt technology and other tools that will automate and improve our efficiency. So maybe the basic or the first thing you can do is first and foremost identify the specific area or the repetitive tasks or the admin tasks that or the recurring issue that you want to address. Be specific about it, quantify it, describe it to him properly that these are the hours spent, these are the error rates, these are the things, and propose a small maybe recommendation on how to transform it and how to transform it for him to approve. And let's see the practical efficiencies that have come out of it. And yeah, so you volunteer to lead a pilot session in relation to that audit procedure to let's see how to improve our efficiency, our accuracy, and overall effectiveness. So as a junior auditor, identify, explain to the CAE what the specific problem is, the repetitive task is that it needs to be made more efficient, and put some substance to it, quantify it. Let's see, let him feel the. It's like you being an internal auditor and reporting to the board. You have to make the presentation quantifiable. You have to make it more concise, clear. So that's how you start. You presenting to your CAE on the transformation agenda or what you want, how you want to integrate technology into the audit process. It's a stepping stone. It's even like a pilot for you so that later on when you're even recommending things to audit committee, you know how to present it. So as a junior editor, I feel you should be able to present this well, add facts, add some substance to it, and be able to sell it to your CAE so that he can adopt and integrate the technology into the internal audit process. So and it makes all of us our processes efficient. So if he can see the value, if you can see the value, he can see the value. Everyone will see the value and buy into it. You can take it, add it to his budget for the year, get approval. Once everyone can see the value, you can explain the value to them. I feel no one will say no to it, and everybody will try and embrace it and add it to the other processes. Unless there's no budget for it, or there are no funds in the organization for it yet. But it starts from somewhere. Let's clearly state what the transformation is about, clear roadmap, so that the CA can appreciate it more. Finally, the audit committee can appreciate it, and finally, the approvals to come for the integration of this technology into internal audit. Yeah.
Wow, thank you. Thank you, Henry. So let the chief audit executive see the value the technology brings to the internal audit function. So you have to build a strong business case, as Henry said, and you have to let the chief audit executive clearly see the value, right, that the technology solution is going to bring to the firm, right? Everybody wants tools that will make their life easier, right? So if you are able to demonstrate to your chief audit executive that this is going to make our life easier, it's going to make us move faster, it's going to make the quality of our work much more credible, I think he will buy into that. So thank you for that question. So I'll move to the next question, Salvation Musa. If a continuous auditing system fails to detect a major fraud because the fraud was intentionally designed to exploit weaknesses in the analytics model itself, should a failure be viewed as a limitation of technology, a failure of auditor judgment, or a failure of audit methodology?
All right, great question, Salvation. So when we look at the technology, I don't think that the technology should be blamed. In fact, the technology should not be blamed because technology is a tool, and it's garbage in, garbage out, right? So the technology should not be blamed. I would say it's partly a judgment failure and mostly a failure of the methodology that was used, in incorporating or implementing the solution. So when I talk about it as being partly a judgment failure, it's most likely that the auditor did not review or validate the outputs and just went ahead to use it. And you recall that in responding to one of the previous questions, I mentioned that AI is not to be used on its own. It must be used in combination with human judgment, right? And there must always, as a control, be human review on the outputs that it produces. So where you have the auditor relying solely on the model, it could create a problem when the output is not accurate. And then when we talk about it being a methodology failure, there should be controls in implementing technology itself. For one, you should have, beyond the outputs from the tool, you should have another line of defense, or I'll say a compensatory control, which can catch errors or issues that may not be detected by the tool. So we can't rely 100% on the tool without a compensating control or human review on the outputs. I would also say that it's possible that the analytics model that was used was not validated independently. So before you roll out or implement such a solution, you must have done several user acceptance tests or several tests, thinking of several scenarios to validate the tool. And so that would involve the auditor and then, whatever team is implementing the solution, thinking about what could go wrong and thinking to the, various extent of how that tool can be overridden, how the controls that the tool provides can be overridden. And all of those different scenarios must be tested extensively before implementation. And then I would say it could also be a governance issue or a governance methodology that has not been included, because you must also look at the user access rights and the governance over such solutions. So who can edit the data that is going into the solution? Who can edit the logic that the solution has? Who can see the output of the solution? And so if someone who is in the process, who is a process owner, has the ability to edit the analytics script, I would say, of that particular solution, then they can manipulate it. So where there hasn't been proper governance review done or proper governance considerations made in implementing the solution, it can lead to a failure of that solution. So to answer the question, it's partly a judgment issue. It is not a technology issue because the technology is garbage in, garbage out. It's what you put in, you get. But it's mostly a methodology issue around, how the governance considerations were made, whether or not they were compensating controls, whether or not they had done an independent validation of the solution, looking at the various things that could go wrong and stress testing it extensively before implementation.
Excellent, excellent. Thank you, Adeolu. And Salvation Musa, I believe your question has been answered. Before we move on to the next question, I want to read a comment from Joseph. Joseph is saying, actuarial valuations are highly technical area, hence the internal auditor must understand the technicalities involved to be able to obtain the quality assurance of the actuarial valuations done. So that's a comment from Joseph. All right, thank you, Joseph. Let's move on to the next one. Pawuzu wants clarity on data-driven audits concentrating more on the entire population rather than sampling. He wants that clarity because he thought he had heard that. So if any of our speakers can take this, please.
Yeah, okay. So I'll attempt to answer this. Yes. So with data-driven audits, now you can do more with it. You don't need to sample because the technology can absorb more, it can process more, it can analyze more. First, we're sampling because we're using less complex technologies. We're using our human inputs to analyze data for technology. But now we have tools. We have ACL or SQL. You can put large amounts of data. You have IDEA. You have also tools that can support the data analysis. So we are moving towards 100% now because we have technologies to support it, and then it gives us more assurance over the work now because now we have gone through the entire population and we know what anomalies, what patterns, we know what to detect and what trends are there during the whole data set.
Excellent, excellent. Thank you, Henry. So yes, we are moving towards entire population analysis because we have the technology to support it. However, even with your sampling, you can still apply the same data-driven approaches and methodologies. So thank you, Henry, for that contribution, right? All right, so Gabriel, I think this question has been answered, but Adeolu, maybe you want to still throw more light. He's asking, how should organizations decide which tools to use for risk monitoring? And what are the practical examples of tools that can be leveraged?
Okay, yes, I did respond to that earlier, but I would say that, just like I said, the determination of the tools to be used would involve several considerations. The first would be the maturity level of the organization and then of the internal audit function of the organization, because automation would need to happen in line with how standardized data is within the organization and how well the organization has been able to automate manual processes. So for example, if the organization is still dealing with a lot of paper-based documentation, where you sign invoices or sign documents and move them from one person to the other without having entries on the system, then you can't automate whatever process you would be reviewing, with those documents because they are paper-based. So the maturity level of the organization when it comes to their data quality is one key consideration, and that would affect the internal audit function. Because again, the IA function cannot automate if the organization itself hasn't automated. That's one key consideration. And then I'll say the next thing would be the goals of the internal audit function during that period. So what's the internal audit function set to achieve? Other things you can think about, even when you have readily available data, is what is the size of your data? Because that can also inform the kind of tools that you would use. Different tools accommodate different sizes of data. You also need to think about what the budget is for the internal audit function. And that ties directly with how much clout the internal audit function has within the organization. I think this would be a different conversation on its own, but there's usually the conversation around internal audit being a cost center as against a profit center. So internal audit always has to demonstrate the value they are adding to the organization, and that can indirectly affect the budget that internal audit has. But in considering what kind of solution to adopt, after you've considered your maturity, your immediate goals, you also need to consider what the budget is. And that can also inform the kind of solutions that you are able to obtain and implement. And there are various tools out there in the market for different purposes. So if you're talking data analytics, of course, we all know of Power BI, which has been adopted by a lot of internal audit functions. You have ACL, you have some audit functions even use just SQL or Excel, Power Query, and the likes for the analytics work. Then when you come into the talk around internal audit management solution, I spoke about the KPMG Risk Hub, which not just has an internal audit management workflow, but also has an analytics module attached to it. But then you have for internal audit management solutions, you have the like of Teammates, you have the like of Pentana, and several other solutions out there in the market. But again, like I said, just think about what the current maturity is, what the needs are, because all of these tools, as much as there are a lot of them out there, they have different capabilities, And one thing we would usually do when we want to, advise or implement on an internal audit solution is to look at the capabilities that each solution has and how best it fits with the organization. So you want to do that assessment as well. You also want to look at your budget and again, down to your maturity and your needs.
Thank you, thank you, thank you. I wish the conversation can keep going, but our time is fast spent and we need to wrap up. I would want to thank all our speakers again for this insightful responses to the topic. And thank you all our participant audience for your contributions. I believe this has been a very, very insightful one, a very, very interesting one. And we look forward to having you in our next webinar. Our next webinar session would be on the 21st of May, and we'll be discussing driving efficiency and collaboration in internal audit delivery, leveraging technology, people, and processes. So that will be our next webinar session. And as I indicated earlier, for all the questions that have not been addressed, we would make sure to address those questions and send it to you via email. Thank you once again for making time to join today's webinar. I would invite, but before I invite Elizabeth, I want to again invite us for the training we have on modern data analytics for internal auditors. We've spoken a lot about data analytics, data-driven auditing, continuous auditing. And what we are saying is data analytics is now embedded as a key requirement within the global internal audit standards, which shows a growing requirement for internal auditors to leverage technology in their end-to-end audit practices. So the training would provide hands-on experience and knowledge of modern data analytics tools, things that you can actually start, implementing, tools you can start leveraging for your internal audit work. And the training will be on the 15th and 16th of July, 2026. So let's please take note of that. The flyers will be shared with you and we'll be happy to have you in the training session. So before we wrap up, I would also want to invite Elizabeth just to give us a few closing remarks. So Elizabeth, over to you, please.
Great. If it's not documented, it's not done. And if it must be done, it must also be done well. A supervisor of mine told me years ago when I got the opportunity to do internship with KPMG. And that has really stood with me all these years to say that the work we do, you must document it in such a way that the documentation should be able to speak for itself. If you keep having to explain yourself with every documentation you've done, it means I didn't do it well. And I believe today's session has been an insightful one for all of us on what to consider to make our audit evidence more clear and more impactful as well. The focus or the purpose of internal auditing has not changed.
we must strengthen our organization's ability to create, to protect, and then to sustain value. So everything you do, ask yourself this question: is it helping my organization to create, protect, and then sustain value? Thank you very much, our moderator, our panelists, the behind-the-scene team who have been able to work tirelessly to put this webinar together, and to each and every one of us who was able to join this call. It's been great having you on board. If you join us in our first webinar and also done so for this second one, we expect you to connect with us again with our third webinar, which will be something that we would wrap up the Internal Audit Month with. And for internal auditors here on call, I believe you've picked essential lessons to apply to your documentation. We must see the global internal audit standards not just as a checklist. It should be the foundation upon which we can improve on a day-to-day basis. Incremental changes on the way we document could have significant impact in our way of work. It brings to bear an experience I had years ago when I did an audit, and it was time for me to discuss with the process owners. In that room, the process owner whose process I had reviewed had gone to alter some of the evidence. So if I had not gotten my evidence intact, it would have been an embarrassing situation. So this is just to make us more aware that as you are gathering the evidence, it should stand the test of time. It should be defensible when you are presenting your work. And if you are an internal auditor and you are not a member of IIA, this is an opportunity for you to join a community of practitioners, because there are tons of information available that would make you more impactful and also provide a value addition in your individual organization. For me today, I've been able to understand or rehash the knowledge I've had in terms of how I keep the evidence. And I believe it will be the same for you. I believe you took some notes, because the rigor of learning sometimes requires that you put some of the things down, because it then makes you more readily in a position to understand or easily recollect when needed. One additional lesson I've picked up is that as internal audit leaders, we must have access to real-time visibility over the progress of work done, the evidence that have been gathered, the review notes that the team have documented, how we also validate the aging of the issues, as well as the remediation status as well. It is very important, because if you don't carry the team along all this time and you're just reviewing the audit reports, you may sign off on the wrong notes. So audit leaders, please take notes and review on the go. With that said, thank you very much for joining us. And we believe we will connect again shortly. Daniel, back to you.
Thank you, Elizabeth. Thank you once again. And catch you again in our next webinar on the 21st of May. Enjoy the rest of your day. Thank you. Bye.
Provided their employees with holistic training, setting the groundwork for responsible adoption of AI across their business, and empowering their workforce to embrace intelligent solutions with confidence. Or this multinational, who were trying to navigate diverse and evolving government regulations. By developing and deploying a flexible AI framework, they minimized risk, increased the trust of their clients, and secured their organization for the next stage of AI growth. These businesses are on the path to becoming intelligent enterprises, paving the way for a safer AI future. How prepared is your organization? You can with AI. You can with KPMG. In the AI era, innovation demands responsibility, building the stronger foundations to keep your organization safe. Take this global food and beverage company who wanted to scale AI across their operations. With KPMG, they provided their employees with holistic training, setting the groundwork for responsible adoption of AI across their business and empowering their workforce to embrace intelligent solutions with confidence. Or this multinational, who were trying to navigate diverse and evolving government regulations. By developing and deploying a flexible AI framework, they minimized risk, increased the trust of their clients, and secured their organization for the next stage of AI growth. These businesses are on the path to becoming intelligent enterprises, paving the way for a safer AI future. How prepared is your organization? You can with AI. You can with KPMG. In the AI era, innovation demands responsibility, building the stronger foundations to keep your organization safe. Take this global food and beverage company who wanted to scale AI across their operations. With KPMG, they provided their employees with holistic training, setting the groundwork for responsible adoption of AI across their business and empowering their workforce to embrace intelligent solutions with confidence. Or this multinational, who were trying to navigate diverse and evolving government regulations. By developing and deploying a flexible AI framework, they minimized risk, increased the trust of their clients, and secured their organization for the next stage of AI growth. These businesses are on the path to becoming intelligent enterprises, paving the way for a safer AI future. How prepared is your organization? You can with AI. You can with KPMG. In the AI era, innovation demands responsibility, building the stronger foundations to keep your organization safe. Take this global food and beverage company who wanted to scale AI across their operations. With KPMG, they provided their employees with holistic training, setting the groundwork for responsible adoption of AI across their business and empowering their workforce to embrace intelligent solutions with confidence.